Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. This week, we got further proof that the 2024 presidential race could be the most unusual in U.S. history. On Monday, Judge Tanya Chutkan set Trump's federal election interference trial for March 4th, 2024. The collision between the political calendar and Trump's trials was described in a Wall Street Journal editorial entirely accurately as a, quote, spectacular mess. It's possible that Trump, the runaway leader in the GOP polls, could already be his party's de facto nominee when jury selection begins. But it's unclear if a conviction in any of his criminal cases will influence voters. Trump also pled not guilty in Georgia to charges that he tried to overturn the state's 2020 election results. And for the second time in as many months, the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, froze at an event while answering questions from reporters.
That's okay. What are your thoughts on running for re-election in 2026?
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
This episode sparked bipartisan concern for the 81-year-old senator's well-being.
I spoke to Mitch. He's a friend. I'm confident he's going to be back to his old self.
McConnell's health issues have highlighted age as a national political issue. A new poll shows 3/4 of the public think that President Biden, who is 80, is too old to serve another term as president, and 69% of Democrats agreed. Joining me to discuss this and more, Kyle Cheney. He's senior legal affairs reporter at Politico. Asma Khalid, NPR White House correspondent and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Mark Leibovich, a staff writer and my colleague at The Atlantic, and Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Thank you all for being here. Susan, let me just start with you and ask you this. I mean, are we just kidding ourselves? Do we already know who the Republican nominee for president is?
Well, I think that we know the likely nominee. I think it's increasingly clear that his rivals are not going to keep him from getting the nomination. The only person who could cost Donald Trump the nomination at this point, I think, is Donald Trump. Maybe through some health problem. I mean, he's 77. I mean,
it makes him young in this context.
Young in comparison to 80. He's got these unprecedented legal problems, including a trial that we think will start as the primaries are going on. So I think it's possible Trump's not the nominee, but I think that is up to Trump's actions and the consequences of what happens to Trump, not to these rivals that we have seen debate on stage recently.
Right. Mark, is this, are we in a situation where the Republican race is actually is sort of an audition to be Trump's vice president?
It certainly looks that way. I mean, that's how the debate last week in Milwaukee played out in some ways. I mean, Rick Scott, there's been some speculation that he was sort of running for that position for a while. He didn't disabuse anyone of it. He didn't do particularly well. Nikki Haley got a lot of immediate sort of speculation around her. Also, DeSantis might have been. So, yeah, I mean, I think clearly there is a hesitation on part of most of the people on stage to take him on in a serious way.
What about Vivek Ramaswamy? Is he count as a possible vice presidential nominee?
I mean, I would say he'd be a decent, in this sort of day and age, he could be. I mean, sure.
Right.
Trump would see him as a complete sycophant, which is great. He would see him as a younger version of himself, which would probably appeal to his narcissism, and there you go.
Right. Asma, any thoughts on whether Trump is already the nominee?
I mean, if you look at historical precedent, I don't think that you can see any Republican primary where an incumbent, and I would say Trump has the benefits of an incumbency, has been in the lead by as much as Donald Trump is, and anybody else catch up with him. There's just no historical precedent for it. I know that everybody keeps looking at the other candidates in this field, thinking somebody might have popped after the debate. I didn't really think anybody popped. I mean, the clearest indication to that was how they responded to the question about Donald Trump. Very few people were willing to take him on. You had a lot of them kind of tussling with each other. Nobody really shined.
But I disagree with you, Mark, in saying that Nikki Haley was trying out to be vice president. I think she has decided presidency or nothing because she's called Donald Trump the most disliked politician in America. That does not seem like an application kind of phrase that you would hear. Tim Scott, I think, could really give the Democrats some problems. To put a black man on the ticket, the Republican ticket, could draw black voters, and it could give permission to swing voters, to suburban voters, that this is a ticket they could vote with some confidence, even if they feel a little uncomfortable with Trump.
Kyle, I want to turn to you and ask you. You've been covering in a deep and granular way the many different court cases that are coming. Can you give us your sense of this last week? What are the things that we should remember about this past week, and what are the things that maybe aren't so consequential?
Sure. I mean, I think right now we're seeing a lot of minutia play out in these court cases, just about timing of trials and sort of how just who's going to be tried with who in the 19-defendant racketeering case in Georgia. These are things that we're all going to forget in a matter of days or weeks when the next shoe drops. I think the biggest thing we're seeing now is what's developing in Georgia with people like Mark Meadows, who are trying to bring that case into federal court. I think that's going to define the way that trial moves forward, and whether Trump faces a federal judge in that case, or goes into Fulton County, and that affects the way the jury is selected, that affects the way the defendants are tried together or not. So I think that's more significant. And what we saw was kind of a mini trial of Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff. I mean, he essentially had to take the stand, which is remarkable at this stage in a criminal proceeding when it's just starting. And we may see that actually play out with other co-defendants like Jeffrey Clark and others who are supposed to be on trial with Donald Trump.
Right. Could you go to this question of the federal trial, the
Sure.
Tanya Chutkin
Sure.
trial? What are the chances that this trial actually starts in the beginning of March?
I think the conventional wisdom is trials always move. I actually think that date is likelier than people expect to hold. And I think that's because, in the normal give and take of the legal process, trials get moved all the time. There's delays, there's issues with evidence. But I think here, there's this conflicting schedules, but here, this should be everyone's top priority. Every single person involved. There's no reason to say, oh, well, I have other trials coming up, so can we please move the date? You have a former president taking a criminal trial for the first time in history. There's no reason why anything else should take precedence over that. So I think she seemed intent on sticking to that schedule, and I don't see why any of the parties would get any leeway to say, oh, things came up, so I couldn't meet the deadlines.
Right. And just walk us through this. How long would a typical trial like this go? When would we know the results of this trial? When will we hear a verdict?
So the government, the prosecutors have estimated that their case, just the prosecution case, would take 4 to 6 weeks. And so you factor in generously, or 1 week of jury selection could take 2 or even 3 weeks to select a jury, beginning on March 4th. You may not, if you don't start a trial till late March, you could be talking early to mid-June, and the issue there is you have another criminal trial scheduled in Florida on May 20th. So if this trial doesn't move along at the pace the government expects, and who knows how long Donald Trump's defense might take, will he put on a defense case? Usually defenses end up shrinking over time. They say, oh, we'll need a month, and it ends up taking 3 days. Mm-hmm. But he may want to call 100 people to the stand. And so you've got this collision course happening with multiple cases, but I don't think you'd see a verdict in that March 4th case until at least late May, early June.
And then you've got the political challenge, too, that you're running into a summer where there's an RNC convention scheduled in Wisconsin, and Donald Trump's the likely nominee.
Right. And just keep on this granular issue because of the mechanics of next year. If he's on trial in Washington, he has to be there because it's a criminal trial.
That's right.
He can't choose to not attend.
Now, even if in theory he would want to, the judge would never allow that, and that's partly because you have a jury. You have a jury that develops certain impressions of people, and the defendants have a right to be not prejudiced by their absence in a criminal case. In a civil case, and Donald Trump has several of those going to trial in the next few months, potentially, he doesn't have to be there, and he probably won't be there. But in his criminal cases, he'll have to sit in the room and be present potentially for several months.
Susan, I'm asking you to imagine the future, and it hasn't happened yet, so it's a problematic assignment. But May, June, imagine that there's a conviction. Imagine that he's the putative nominee. Is there anything that could happen to keep him from getting the nomination at that point?
Well, I'm sure there are things that could happen, but I think he intends to be the nominee. I think his legal strategy and his political strategy are one and the same. His legal strategy is to get reelected as president, to give him protection at least during his term of office, to have the possibility of pardoning himself in the federal trials. Before we before we imagine the future, can you imagine the present where we are sitting around talking about the former president's trial, and will it prevent him from getting the nomination again? And by the way, well, what will voters think about electing someone who's a convicted felon? Would that bother any Americans?
Right.
And
No, we're obviously in a simulation on Earth too right now. Yeah, that's clear to me.
I think we shouldn't lose sight of these extraordinary times that are just beyond anything that the founders ever could have imagined.
Right. Well, I mean, we've spoken about this actually. You know, there's no protections for some of this built into the Constitution because the writers of the Constitution never imagined this. Is that
No,
a fair?
I can't imagine they did. I mean, as we talked about, you know, there's the mechanism of impeachment is the way you deal with a president who presumably has violated his oath or the law while in office and or done something unforgivable. And you know, impeachment as a tool seems kind of like a broken process in the modern era. So even if he were convicted, you know, and somehow elected president, I don't think that tool would be Congress would avail itself of that option either.
Right. The main tool America has is the vote every 4 years. That's how we choose who becomes president, and that's where we're heading. Asma, I'm very curious. You cover the White House. How is the Biden administration? How is the campaign thinking about how to run against someone who may very well be a convicted felon?
Well, I will say broadly, I mean, the White House will publicly never touch Trump. So let's put that, they're sort of trying to create this division where
There's going to be a
whenever
time
asked,
when they have
they
to,
don't want to talk. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
if he's the nominee, I think that becomes very challenging. But in terms of the campaign and the advisors, I mean, one thing I have begun to notice is throughout this summer, you saw Biden, you often saw VP Harris out on the road extensively talking about running to preserve freedom. And freedom means a whole bunch of things. It means Donald Trump, I would say in some degree. It means abortion rights. It means voting rights. They equate it with guns. And that messaging is something that this administration, that this campaign is going to continue with. You know, I think it's an interesting message because other things, you can talk about the economy, you can talk about issues of age, which we'll get to, could be bigger challenges for this White House. But on democracy and freedom, they look at the fact that they had success with that message in the midterms, and they think it will continue to be a potent issue for them, especially if they can point to Donald Trump being the Republican nominee on the other side. There's no one like Trump who really galvanizes Democrats when it comes to enthusiasm.
Right. Mark, I mean, is there a strategy you can imagine? No president has had to devise a strategy to run against a convicted felon before. Can you imagine what they're going to do?
I mean, you would think it would be an asset, right? I mean, it certainly, you would think
If
that
we
it would
weren't
be
in a
fine
simulation,
position
yes.
to be in if we were not in a weird simulation. I mean, look, I mean, there's an apples to oranges component to this, which is that we're dealing with a primary landscape right now versus a general election landscape.
Right.
I mean, I do want to point out, and this didn't get a lot of attention, but at the debate the other night, Christie and to some degree Asa Hutchinson were kind of going after Trump, and there was this big wall of noise from the crowd, like these boos, and immediately they were coming to Trump's defense. Because I was covering the debate, which means I was in a media center with access to TV sets that had feeds that showed the crowd, there was actually a fair amount of support in the audience and a lot of nodding heads for this not being a good thing. So these are hardcore Republicans, and I do think that it is kind of important to try to place ourselves in the spring 2024 mindset of what this actually could look like in real time.
Do you think that there are Republicans out there who will, supporters of Donald Trump, who will, if he's convicted, just change their minds?
Not supporters of Donald Trump, but I think that we're talking, you know, conservatively maybe 50% of Republicans who's, you know, Trump is not their first choice, and it could have a chilling effect, certainly as you get closer to an election.
Right.